comet, asteroid, or something else? A Harvard astrophysicist believes there's a strong likelihood this is a craft of alien origin.
First, its brightness implies that if it represents reflection of sunlight from a solid object, it needs to be 20 kilometers in diameter. That's bigger than Manhattan Island. And this is a giant rock.
The 3I Atlas probe had been quietly circling near Mars for weeks. Its instruments tuned to detect subtle changes in the thin atmosphere and shifting magnetic disturbances that ripple across the planet's skies. Then, without warning, its sensors lit up with readings that even the mission controllers back on Earth described as terrifying. A surge of energy, precise in its origin yet immense in scale, flared near the boundary where Mars's exosphere thins into space. The event was not a natural flare, not a simple spike of solar activity, but a directed pulse of power that rippled outward like an invisible shock wave. For the first time in decades of planetary observation, researchers were forced to confront something wholly alien in its design, something that seemed less like a cosmic accident and more like an intentional act. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The magnitude of the pulse overwhelmed 3I on Atlas's primary systems for a brief moment. Backup modules kept the craft functional, but the data log shows a period of silence in which the probe seemed to fall into shadow, as though cut away from both Mars and Earth. When its instruments reawakened, they registered anomalies stretching across thousands of kilometers of Martian orbit. The dust-laden skies of the red planet shimmered faintly in the aftermath, reflecting radiation frequencies not seen in any known astrophysical process. To scientists, this wasn't just a signal. It was a demonstration of something powerful enough to bend the very conditions around Mars into patterns that defied explanation. The implications were staggering. Mars is a world we've mapped, roved, and studied down to grains of dust. Yet the event observed by 3I Atlas hinted at forces capable of reshaping the familiar into something unknown. The energy pulse appeared to originate from beneath the Martian surface, forcing experts to reconsider assumptions about what truly lies hidden beneath its crust. Decades of data painted Mars as barren, geologically quiet, and utterly lifeless, but the controlled nature of the surge raised the possibility that advanced processes, mechanical, technological, or even biological, are still at play beneath its deserts. Equally alarming was the timing. The probe's path had carried it over regions scarred by ancient riverbeds and craters that once might have hosted oceans. If there are remnants of ancient civilizations buried beneath those layers, then the pulse could have been a reactivation of dormant technology. The burst bore the hallmarks of design rather than chance, raising the chilling question of whether Mars had once nurtured intelligence capable of engineering such phenomena, or whether something else entirely has claimed the planet as its hidden domain. From an orbital perspective, 3I Atlas captured sequences that unsettled even seasoned astrophysicists. The Martian magnetic field, normally weak and fragmented, flared like a wounded creature. Thin arcs of magnetism stretched far beyond their expected range, as if being forcibly expanded. The Martian atmosphere responded as well. A faint aurora shimmered not just near the poles, but across the equator, glowing with hues more commonly seen in deep space radiation storms. And then, as quickly as it began, the activity subsided, leaving only data trails and a silence that seemed more ominous than the noise. The terrifying part wasn't only the event itself, but the implications of scale. The energy required to produce such a pulse exceeds anything humanity has yet constructed. It dwarfed nuclear detonations, rivaling instead the magnitude of controlled stellar phenomena. If this was a test, then someone or something demonstrated mastery over physics at a level far beyond our own. If it was an accident, then humanity has just glimpsed forces that could destabilize entire planets without effort. Either way, Mars became more than a quiet desert world that day. It became a stage for forces so immense they could rewrite the boundaries of exploration. For the mission planners, the event opened new debates about the risks of planetary approach. 3I Atlas was designed to study Mars as a scientific object, but what it witnessed positioned the red planet as a potentially volatile environment, one capable of projecting sudden and devastating bursts of energy. What would happen if a future crewed mission, perhaps even one already en route, was caught in the radius of such an eruption? Human lives, spacecraft, and decades of preparation could be obliterated in an instant. The terror lies not only in the unknown source of the surge, but in the recognition that Mars is no longer passive ground for exploration. It may be an active participant. The ripple effects also stretch into philosophy. For centuries, Mars has stood as a symbol of human aspiration and imagination, a place where stories of warlike gods, dying civilizations, and bold futures converge. The event recorded by 3I Atlas collapses the boundary between myth and observation. If forces exist under Mars that can send energy surging into space, then perhaps the old tales of ancient power were not merely metaphorical. It awakens the uneasy sense that Mars has always been more than it appeared, and that our species has only now brushed against its concealed reality. Scientists pored over the probe's logs, replaying the incident second by second. The data revealed patterns within the energy burst that seemed structured, waveforms repeated with mathematical precision, like a signature encoded within the chaos. Was it a message, a warning, or simply the inevitable byproduct of machinery we cannot yet comprehend? The answer remained locked in the oscillations themselves, but the terrifying part was how deliberate they looked. Nature does not often arrange itself in such crisp, repeating order unless guided by intelligence. Every implication grew darker as researchers tried to rationalize what 3I Atlas had seen. If the pulse originated from technology, then it means Mars harbors machines powerful enough to alter planetary-scale forces. If it came from an unknown natural process, then humanity has underestimated the dynamics of planetary interiors to a dangerous degree. Either path points to a reality where Mars is not safe, predictable terrain, but a world with capacities to shape its own space environment in ways that humanity cannot counter. The sheer proximity of the event amplifies the unease. Mars is not a distant star system light years away, but a neighboring planet only months from Earth. The energy that flared there would not need to leap across interstellar gulfs to affect us. It sits within reach of our expanding spacecraft, within the trajectory of our colonization dreams. A burst of that scale, directed differently, could destabilize or disable satellites, endanger astronauts, or even disrupt Earth's magnetic equilibrium. The closeness of the phenomenon makes it terrifying not because it is abstract, but because it is tangible and near. 3I Atlas itself continues to orbit, but mission logs note subtle lingering effects. Its instruments remain hypersensitive, prone to static spikes that weren't present before. Some within the mission team speculate that the probe may have been imprinted by the event, its internal systems resonating faintly with frequencies outside human design. If so, then 3I Atlas is not merely an observer but a carrier of something alien, an unsettling reminder that contact does not always announce itself openly, but sometimes seeps silently into the tools we send forward. As the story of the event unfolds, the most frightening realization emerges. This may not have been an isolated occurrence. Planetary dynamics are slow, but the structured nature of the pulse hints at repeatability. If it can happen once, it can happen again, perhaps at greater intensity, perhaps with a target. Mars may now be understood not as dormant, but as active in ways that border on the incomprehensible. And humanity, by reaching out toward it, has placed itself directly within reach of whatever forces lie beneath the planet's dust and stone. The flare captured by 3I Atlas near Mars was more than a simple energy anomaly. It was a spectacle of raw force sculpted into precision, like a knife blade cutting across the fabric of space. As the data streams poured back to Earth, analysts realized they were not just observing an event. They were witnessing something that had no precedent in any catalog of known astrophysical phenomena. What shook them most was the way the pulse interacted with its environment. The Martian orbit was briefly altered, its dust rings vibrating in faint resonance as though the planet itself had been plucked like the string of a cosmic instrument. Nothing in the standard models of planetary physics could explain such behavior. It was deliberate, frighteningly efficient, and so close to Earth that the implications gnawed at every expert who studied it. The effect on Mars's tenuous atmosphere was equally unnerving. Long thought too thin to sustain large-scale disruptions, the air swelled and shimmered in response to the pulse, creating pressure waves that moved like invisible storms across the entire planet. At certain altitudes, 3I Atlas's cameras captured strange, almost geometric cloud formations, patterns that looked less like weather and more like fingerprints left by forces beyond comprehension. For a few minutes, the atmosphere appeared alive, reshaped by hands unseen, sculpted into a testament that Mars was not as inert as we believed. The terror did not come from the clouds themselves, but from the recognition that something on or within Mars had the capacity to reach into the very sky and mold it at will. On Earth, the data stirred ferocious debate among physicists, astronomers, and engineers. Some argued that the pulse was evidence of a natural process buried deep in Mars's mantle, perhaps the result of tectonic plates grinding against remnants of magnetized rock. Others countered that no natural explanation could account for the level of coherence observed in the waveforms. Natural phenomena produce chaos, noise, irregularity, but the pulse was elegant, balanced, perfectly aligned with equations that suggested design. This division of opinion only heightened the unease, because both explanations pointed toward danger. If natural, then the universe harbors processes far more violent and uncontrollable than we imagined. If artificial, then intelligence capable of planetary-scale engineering lurks within striking distance of Earth. The silence following the event was perhaps the most disturbing part. After such a colossal display, no further pulses were detected. Mars fell back into its usual patterns, its winds still, its thin atmosphere calm. The planet seemed to pretend nothing had happened, leaving humanity with only data logs and unanswered questions. The quiet was not comforting. It was the quiet of a predator that has revealed itself only for a moment, then vanished again into shadow. Mission controllers knew that absence of evidence was not evidence of safety. The calm after the storm felt more like the pause before another larger wave. Engineers studying the probe itself noticed something odd in its hardware behavior. The sensors had not only recorded the pulse, they had reacted to it. Subsystems flickered with activity as if compelled by an external influence. Patterns appeared in memory banks that no human had programmed, resonances echoing through circuits at frequencies aligned with the burst. The probe seemed almost altered, touched by what it had encountered. Was it possible that the pulse carried not just energy but information, imprinted directly onto any system within range? If so, 3I Atlas was no longer a neutral observer. It had become a vessel of transmission, carrying traces of something alien back toward Earth. The implications of this realization were chilling. Mars was no longer just an object of exploration. It was a source of active influence. Every spacecraft in orbit, every rover on its surface might be vulnerable to the same effect. If the pulse was designed to interact with technology, then the planet itself had become a trap for machinery, bending our instruments into extensions of forces we cannot yet name. The thought of future human missions being caught in such influence raised the specter of catastrophe on an unimaginable scale. Astronauts relying on equipment that could be rewritten mid-mission would face dangers far beyond simple mechanical failure. For planetary scientists, the event shattered the boundary between geology and mystery. Mars had always been a place of riddles, the dry riverbeds hinting at water, the faint methane spikes suggesting biology, the magnetic anomalies frozen in ancient crust, but those were puzzles of the past. The pulse captured by 3I Atlas was a phenomenon of the present, happening in real time, demonstrating that Mars was not a dead world, but one still capable of exerting terrifying influence. This forced a re-evaluation of everything we thought we knew about planetary life cycles. If Mars can still produce or channel such forces, then perhaps no planet is ever truly silent. The terror deepened when analysts examined the directionality of the pulse. It had not simply radiated outward in all directions like a flare. Instead, it was aimed, its energy structured into a beam that spread with mathematical precision across a narrow band of space. This precision suggested intent. The idea that Mars itself, or something beneath its surface, had directed the energy outward was almost unbearable. It was no longer simply a world under study. It had become an actor in the cosmic theater, capable of reaching across space with precision strikes of energy. The fact that 3I Atlas was directly within that band made the event feel less like coincidence and more like observation in return. Philosophers too weighed in, finding in the event echoes of myths and fears long buried in human culture. Mars has always been the god of war in ancient thought, a symbol of conflict and divine anger. Now, for the first time, the planet seemed to justify that symbolism. The pulse was not a weapon in the human sense, but it was a demonstration of force, an act of power on scales we cannot match. To those who saw the planet through this symbolic lens, the message was clear. Mars is not merely a stage for exploration, but a player, and perhaps even a guardian of its own secrets. The unsettling part is not just that the pulse happened, but that it was measured at all. The probability of 3I Atlas being in exactly the right place, with its instruments pointed in precisely the right direction, raises uncomfortable questions. Was it luck, or was the probe meant to see it? If the pulse carried informational patterns, was it designed to be observed? This possibility suggests that humanity has been acknowledged, that Mars, or whatever lies beneath it, has chosen this moment to reveal its presence. The terror grows not from the violence of the event, but from the thought that it may have been a calculated introduction. Astronomers began searching for echoes of similar pulses in past data. Old mission logs from orbiters and landers were re-examined with fresh eyes. Tiny anomalies, once dismissed as glitches, now look suspiciously like faint precursors to the event seen by 3I Atlas. Perhaps this has been happening for years, decades even, only at lower intensities. If so, then humanity has been under observation longer than anyone realized. The terrifying idea that Mars has been quietly sending whispers into our machines, waiting until now to deliver a roar, unsettled even the most hardened skeptics. The shape of the energy wave also carried eerie implications. Analysis revealed harmonics in frequencies aligned with biological rhythms, heartbeats, neural oscillations, cycles of breathing. This alignment could be coincidence, or it could be the most disturbing feature of all. If the pulse was designed to resonate with living systems, then its purpose might extend beyond machines. Mars may not only have the ability to alter technology, it might also have the capacity to influence biology. For those dreaming of colonization, this raises a nightmare scenario where human settlers are not just physically endangered by the environment, but psychically altered by it. What 3I Atlas observed also challenged our understanding of distance and scale. The pulse was so immense that it bent space itself, distorting light patterns from distant stars for a brief instant. For those seconds, Mars became a lens, a manipulator of space-time, wielding energies usually reserved for black holes or neutron stars. The terrifying implication is that forces capable of altering space are not confined to distant galaxies, but can emerge within our own solar system. If Mars can harness such power, then no frontier is safe, because the universe itself can turn hostile without warning. The probe's recordings captured one last detail that scientists hesitated to publish at first. Within the core of the energy wave, faint structures appeared. Symmetrical patterns that resembled geometric lattices. They looked like architecture, but architecture built from energy instead of stone. To some, these patterns suggested machinery operating on a scale beyond imagination, perhaps buried beneath Mars or hovering invisibly above it. To others, they looked like language, a kind of visual mathematics etched into the pulse as a deliberate message. Either interpretation deepened the fear because both confirmed intelligence behind the event. The most terrifying thought is the simplest. What if the pulse was only a test? If this was a fraction of the full capacity of whatever lies within Mars, then humanity has witnessed not the end point, but the beginning of demonstration. The event becomes less an isolated mystery and more a warning shot across the void of space. And if that is true, then everything humanity has planned for Mars, exploration, colonization, expansion, stands on a foundation that could be erased in a single moment by forces we cannot counter. In the silence that followed, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Mars turned slowly in its orbit, red and cold as ever, yet cloaked now in dread. The 3I Atlas probe continued its path, circling a planet that had just shown it was more than dust and rock. The data streams reached Earth, carrying with them the unsettling knowledge that something terrifying had stirred on our neighbor world, something that had revealed itself only briefly, then vanished again into silence. And humanity, fragile and unprepared, was left to wonder not if it would happen again, but when. When the pulse near Mars faded and 3I Atlas drifted back into calm telemetry, the universe felt heavier, as though a boundary had been crossed. For the scientists glued to the incoming data, the most disturbing realization was not only that such a burst could happen, but that its complexity hinted at layers still unseen. The phenomenon was vast, yet the data suggested that only a fragment of its depth had been captured. Like seeing the tip of a mountain rise above the clouds, 3I Atlas had recorded only the visible crown of something massive buried below. Every frame from the probe's imaging systems became a treasure trove of unsettling details. One sequence showed the faint glow of the Martian surface beneath the aftermath of the flare. Small regions of the crust flickered with heat not from the sun, but from within. Thermal readings spiked in local clusters, as if something beneath was active, releasing bursts of energy in sync with the main event. These patterns resembled the grids of a power distribution network, repeating across hundreds of kilometers, then fading again into invisibility. The terrifying implication was that Mars may not just house random geological features, but an organized system, buried infrastructure operating on planetary scales. The gravity readings provided another clue. Sensitive accelerometers aboard 3I Atlas registered subtle fluctuations in Mars's gravitational field during the pulse. For a brief window, the tug of the planet increased and decreased rhythmically, as though mass itself was being shifted or manipulated. No known natural process could cause such an effect without cataclysmic upheaval, yet Mars remained outwardly stable. The only explanations left demanded that forces were at play which can alter how gravity presents itself, forces bordering on the manipulation of space-time itself. If gravity can be bent on command, then Mars is host to technologies or phenomena far beyond anything human civilization has yet grasped. More disturbing still was the realization that the pulse did not end cleanly. While the primary energy flare dissipated, faint harmonic ripples continued to spread across the void. They were weak, almost undetectable, yet persisted long enough to cross millions of kilometers. Some analysts speculated these harmonics could travel indefinitely, like a cosmic broadcast seeded into the solar system. If that is true, then the flare was not just an event confined to Mars, but a signal, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. Humanity may not be the only audience for what happened. The entire system could now be listening. When specialists dissected the harmonics, they found unsettling resonances with orbital frequencies of nearby bodies. Tiny alignments appeared between the waveforms and the orbits of Mars's moons, Phobos and Deimos. It was as if the pulse had been tuned deliberately to interact with them. Phobos, already known for its unusual orbit and accelerated spiral toward Mars, flickered with anomalous readings during the event. Instruments on 3I Atlas caught its surface glowing faintly for moments, then dimming again. Deimos, further out, resonated like a bell struck by a hammer, its orbit quivering ever so slightly. These subtle but undeniable effects suggested the moons themselves might be integral to the process, either as tools, conduits, or anchors for the terrifying force that revealed itself. The thought of Mars's moons as components of a larger system sparked speculation far beyond geology. If they are more than simple captured asteroids, if they are intentionally placed or engineered objects, then the entire Martian system becomes a construct, not an accident. The terror here lies not in the pulse itself, but in the dawning suspicion that what we call natural satellites might in fact be parts of a colossal machine whose purpose remains hidden. If Mars is wrapped in such a structure, then the flare 3I Atlas observed was not random, but a maintenance routine, a test cycle, or perhaps even a warning. While engineers and astronomers battled over interpretations, linguists and cryptographers entered the debate. The repeating structures within the energy burst were too organized to ignore, too precise to be dismissed as noise. Patterns of repetition resembled syntax, with intervals spaced like the beats of a coded language. It became clear that the event might not merely be energetic, it might be communicative. If so, then humanity had not just witnessed a terrifying force, but had been spoken to in the only language such an intelligence could use: physics itself. Decoding that message, however, proved daunting. The waveforms resisted translation into numbers or letters, yet their rhythm suggested meaning. If the flare was a message, then humanity had received its first interplanetary communique, and the content was wrapped in power so immense it could reshape worlds. The possibility that the event carried meaning raised darker questions. Was the message meant for us or for something else? If the harmonics truly extend across the solar system, then other bodies, other watchers, might be the intended recipients. Humanity could have intercepted a transmission not meant for its ears. If that is the case, then we are eavesdropping on a conversation between powers we cannot yet fathom, and 3I Atlas is the accidental spy. The fear is not simply that we are too small to answer, but that those truly meant to hear the signal will now know we listened. Meanwhile, deep in the probe's onboard logs, a hidden layer of data emerged. Engineers combing through low-priority diagnostic channels discovered strange bursts that mirrored the timing of the pulse. These weren't standard sensor outputs, but dormant circuits suddenly activated, recording in ways they were never designed for. The probe had become an unwilling collaborator in the event. Its hidden systems coaxed into functioning outside their intended purpose. To the mission team, this discovery was chilling. It meant the pulse had not just imprinted resonance, it had reached into the machine, awakening circuits buried in silicon, bending hardware to serve its goals. This interaction blurred the line between observation and infection. The spacecraft, once a neutral observer, now carried traces of alien intention in its digital veins. Speculation spread into darker corridors. What if 3I Atlas had not merely observed the event but had been changed by it? If the probe returns streams of altered data, how can Earth distinguish between raw observation and embedded instruction? The very act of receiving the logs could mean that Earth itself has become part of the pulse's reach. For the first time, scientists faced the possibility that information itself could carry danger, not through viruses or codes, but through the raw manipulation of energy woven into patterns that bypass understanding. Even beyond the implications for Earth, the event cast new suspicion on Mars's history. The planet's long-lost rivers, dried oceans, and fractured crust tell the story of a world that once could have sustained life. Perhaps the pulse was evidence that something never left. If civilizations once walked its valleys, perhaps their works remain slumbering beneath the dust. The event might have been a reactivation, the awakening of ancient technology designed to last millions of years. If so, then Mars is not simply a fossil of a once-living world, but a tomb whose machinery still dreams, capable of terrifying bursts when disturbed. Humanity may have triggered it by drawing near, our probes scratching at the surface and awakening what had lain dormant. Equally unsettling is the scale of time involved. If the pulse is the artifact of a long-dead intelligence, then we are witnessing echoes of a civilization that mastered forces before humans even lit their first fires. The flare becomes a message not just across space, but across epochs, telling us that intelligence once rose on Mars to heights we cannot yet approach. The terror lies in confronting the fragility of our own moment in history. We imagine ourselves as pioneers, yet before us may have stood architects capable of rewriting planetary physics, whose monuments now rumble again beneath Martian soil. Some scientists push the speculation further still. What if the flare was not a relic of the past, but an act of defense? The structured precision of the pulse, its ability to affect the moons, the atmosphere, and the probe itself, all suggest a system capable of shielding Mars from intrusion. If Mars is protected by a mechanism that can project energy at will, then any attempt to land, colonize, or mine the planet may awaken forces that will not tolerate our presence. The Red Planet would no longer be a frontier of opportunity, but a fortress whose defenses we barely glimpsed. The flare was terrifying not because it destroyed, but because it warned. The broader scientific community struggled to contain the implications. If Mars can unleash such phenomena, what of other worlds? Have we misunderstood the silence of the cosmos? Perhaps planets we dismiss as barren are in fact armed with similar guardians, slumbering until disturbed. If so, humanity's expansion into space could trigger a cascade of awakenings, each one revealing a terrifying truth: that the universe does not welcome intruders lightly. 3I Atlas continued to orbit, its sensors still twitching with echoes of the event. Every pass over Mars carried with it the anxiety of recurrence. Would the pulse erupt again? Would it grow stronger, more direct, more targeted? Mission planners argued endlessly about whether to pull the probe back or let it drift into silence. The danger was not just to the spacecraft, but to the human psyche itself. Every byte of data it returned deepened the weight of dread, whispering that the universe is not ours to tame. The event near Mars has redefined exploration. The terrifying truth revealed by 3I Atlas is not that space is empty and hostile, but that it may be occupied, alive, and willing to respond. The flare was not simply a burst of energy, it was an unveiling, a glimpse into forces that can bend physics, reshape worlds, and perhaps decide who is allowed to approach. Humanity is left staring at a neighboring planet that has just declared itself far more than rock and dust. Mars, once the dream of colonization, now looms as a presence both enigmatic and terrifying, its silence more menacing than any roar. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on 3I Atlas's terrifying move near Mars? Surprise or expected? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.